If you are financially ready to buy a home in Atlanta and you're still sitting on the sidelines waiting for the market to crash, I think you're making a mistake. Pending home sales in Metro Atlanta just dropped more than 12% from last year to the lowest July level that we have seen in more than a decade. Sellers have lost a lot of their control, buyers finally have leverage again, and somehow a lot of people are completely missing it. And here's what makes this market so strange. Home prices haven't crashed. They've actually been holding up surprisingly well. So how can sellers be losing control if home prices aren't really falling? And if you're thinking about buying right now, I want you to ask yourself something. Are you waiting for home prices to fall, or are you really waiting for a chance to buy a house without having to give the seller everything they want? Because those are two completely different things, and one of them is already happening. Here's the thing. I'm seeing a lot of homes sit. I'm seeing a lot of price reductions, and I'm seeing sellers pay thousands and thousands of dollars towards buyers' closing costs. They are negotiating repairs, and frankly, they're just entertaining offers that they wouldn't have even considered a few years ago. But there's one type of listing that I'm watching very closely right now, and I think this is where buyers have one of the biggest opportunities. I'll show you exactly what I'm looking for, but first you need to understand why sellers are suddenly much more willing to negotiate. Through July, the average sales price for a single-family home across the market was actually up about 2% last year, so meaning the value. If you stop there, you could easily look at that number and think nothing has changed. But underneath that number, the negotiation has changed dramatically. There are more homes for sale. Homes are taking a lot longer to sell. Homes that sold through July spent an average of 62 total days on the market compared to 57 days last year. And more listings are just coming off the market altogether. They're expiring without selling. So sellers aren't necessarily losing a ton of value on paper. They're losing something else, their ability to dictate the deal. There simply aren't as many buyers stepping up and putting homes under contract. When sellers have fewer buyers to choose from, the buyers who are actually in the market become a whole lot more valuable. That's the irony in this market. I think a lot of buyers are sitting out because they think it's a bad time to buy. But all of those buyers sitting on the sidelines are actually helping to create the opportunity for the buyers who are still in the market. Less competition changes the entire negotiation. So let's go to the type of listing I told you that I'm watching closely. If I were buying right now, I would not necessarily be chasing the beautiful new listing that everybody sees the minute it hits the market. I'm watching the house everybody saw 45 days ago and forgot about. Imagine a house hits the market at $550,000. The seller thinks it's worth every penny and isn't really open or interested in negotiating. 3 weeks later, no offer. So they reduce the price. Another few weeks go by and still nothing. By the time you walk through the door, you may be dealing with a very different seller than the one who listed that house on day one. That is the seller that I want to know more about. Here are the questions that I'm asking. Have they already bought another house? Are they relocating? Do they really need to close by a certain date? Have they received any offers at all? Why hasn't the house sold? And most importantly, what are they willing to do today that they weren't willing to do 6 weeks ago? Maybe we negotiate the price. Maybe we ask them to contribute towards closing costs. Maybe something comes up during the inspection and they're willing to make the repair because the last thing they want is for the house to go back on the market. Suddenly, you have a buyer getting a much better overall deal without the average home price in Atlanta ever showing some massive decline. But sometimes there is nothing fundamentally wrong with the house. The seller just got the price wrong. Maybe their neighbor sold for a certain amount 2 years ago and they assumed their house would sell for more. Maybe they spent a bunch of money renovating and assumed that a buyer would pay them back dollar for dollar on what they spent. Maybe they wanted to test the market. Sellers can test the market all they want, but eventually the market gives them the answer. And after 60 days without an offer, that answer gets pretty difficult to ignore. But this brings up a question I know most buyers are going to have. What if you buy now and prices come down further? Did you make a mistake by not waiting? First, prices could come down. I'm never going to tell you they can't. I don't have a crystal ball. And if you need the value of your house to go up immediately after you buy it for the purchase price to make sense, I would question whether you should be buying a house right now in the first place. I think buying a home makes much more sense when you can comfortably afford the payment and you actually want the house and you expect to own it long enough that you're not depending on what the market does over the next 12 months. Real estate can go up and it can come down. I would not buy a home today based on the assumption that somebody is going to pay me more for it next year. But this is also why the deal you negotiate on the front end matters. If a seller has already reduced their price and you're able to negotiate additional value through the price, closing costs, or repairs, maybe all of the above, you're not approaching the purchase price the same way that you would have when buyers were fighting to pay over asking price and giving sellers everything that they wanted and more. Closing costs are a big part of this that I think gets overlooked. You can buy a house relatively close to the asking price and still negotiate thousands of dollars from the seller to help you get to the closing table. Depending on your financing and specific transaction, those concessions can make a meaningful difference in what a purchase price actually costs you. That's why I think asking how much have Atlanta home prices fallen is the wrong question. I want to know how much competition I have, how motivated is the seller, and what I can negotiate. Those things tell me a lot more about the opportunity in front of me than an average sales price ever will. But I also want to be careful because I can already hear how this could sound. A realtor says it's a great time to buy. That is not what I'm saying. There are people who should absolutely not buy a house right now. If the monthly payment stretches you, if buying would completely wipe out your savings, or if you're not sure you'll be in the house very long, I don't care how motivated the seller is, a deal on a house you cannot comfortably afford is not a good deal. The buyers I'm talking to are in a very different position. You have stable income, you have money saved, you can comfortably afford the payment, and you plan to stay in the house for several years. But you're sitting on the sidelines because you're convinced there is going to be some perfect moment when everything gets better. And this is where I'm probably going to disagree with some people. I think financially ready buyers can wait themselves out of a really good opportunity. And if mortgage rates are the reason that you're waiting, there's something I think you need to consider before you decide to sit out another 6 months. Because getting the lower rate you're waiting for could actually cost you something else. I hate to break it to you, but you're not the only person waiting. There are a lot of buyers sitting on the sidelines because affordability is difficult right now. So if rates eventually fall and that brings more buyers back into the market, you could end up with a better interest rate, yes, but more competition for the same good houses. And that changes the deal. The seller who might give you $10,000 towards closing costs today may not give you anything if they have multiple interested buyers. The house that sits for a month today might sell much faster if demand picks up. You could absolutely gain something with a lower rate while giving up some of your negotiating power. Now, I'm not predicting this is going to happen. Nobody knows where rates are going or exactly how buyers will respond if they do fall. My point is that there is a trade-off in every single market. Cheap houses, low rates, ton of inventory, and sellers desperate to make a deal all at the same time would be absolutely wonderful. I just wouldn't build my financial plan around waiting for the perfect combination. Now, what does all this mean if you're a seller? It does not mean that you can't sell your house or that you have to give it away. But I think sellers need to understand that the strategy that worked a few years ago can hurt you today. And you cannot just throw a price on the house to see what happens and assume buyers will eventually come up to meet you. We're just not in that market anymore. If you start too high and buyers reject the price, you can end up chasing the market with price reductions while your listing gets older and older. And once your house has been on the market for 45 or 60 days, buyers start asking the exact question I just told you I want my buyers asking. Why hasn't this sold, and how motivated is the seller, or is something wrong with the house? So if I were selling right now, I would want to try my absolute best to get the price right from the very beginning. I would want the house to show as well as possible. And I would understand before we ever received an offer what I was really willing to negotiate. Sellers can still do very well in this market, but I think unrealistic sellers are going to have a much harder time than they did when buyers had almost no alternatives. And there's one final trap I want buyers to avoid, because having all this leverage can actually lead you into a bad decision if you use it the wrong way. A great negotiation does not automatically mean you bought a great house. A $30,000 discount on the wrong house is still the wrong house. I still care about location. I still care about condition, whether the house actually works for you, and how easy it could be to sell someday. I would never buy something I didn't really want simply because I felt like I was getting too good of a deal. So if I were buying a house in Atlanta right now, my strategy would be pretty simple. I would make sure I was financially ready. Then I would find the right house. I would pay very close attention to days on the market and if there have been any price reductions, and I would have my agent find out whatever they could about the seller's situation. Once I find the right house and I saw an opportunity, this is when I would use the leverage this market is giving me. Because I don't think the biggest opportunity right now is finding a house that suddenly is 20% cheaper. It would be finding the right house with the seller on day 60 who has finally realized they don't have the control that they thought they had on day 1. If you're financially ready to buy, this is the market I want to be shopping in. Not because some random realtor told me it's a great time to buy, and not because I'm trying to predict what happens next. I'd want to be there because I can afford the house, I have choices, and I have an opportunity to negotiate a deal that actually makes sense for me. If you would like to connect with me, feel free to reach out. This is my cell phone number, and my information is also in the description below. And hey, if you like this video, go check out my next one where I go over the 5 red flags that would make me walk away from any house. I will see you over there.